I knew something was wrong the moment I saw tire tracks leading through my supposedly locked gate at 4 in the morning. My name is Tyler Armstrong, and I own a 40-acre property about 15 miles outside of Boulder, Colorado. The property includes a small house, a workshop, and most importantly, a gravel pit operation that I have been running for the past 8 years. It is not glamorous work, but it pays the bills and then some. I supply sand, gravel, and aggregate materials to construction companies throughout the county, and I take pride in running a legitimate business with all the proper permits and insurance. The property sits adjacent to the Meadowbrook Heights development, one of those cookie-cutter subdivisions that sprouted up about 5 years ago. 200 identical houses, each painted in one of 4 approved colors, with lawns that must be exactly 2.5 inches tall and mailboxes that must be regulation black. The kind of place where the HOA measures your grass with a ruler and fines you if your Christmas lights stay up past January 2nd. When they first broke ground on Meadowbrook Heights, the developers tried to buy my land. They offered me a decent price, but not decent enough to make me want to give up my business and livelihood. I politely declined. They came back with a slightly better offer. I declined again. Then they tried the not-so-polite approach, sending lawyers with vague threats about zoning violations and environmental concerns. I had my own lawyer send them a very detailed letter explaining exactly how legitimate my operation was, and how much I would enjoy a protracted legal battle that would delay their development by years. They backed off, but the relationship between me and Meadowbrook Heights has been frosty ever since. The HOA, in particular, seems to view my gravel pit as a personal affront to their manicured suburban paradise. Never mind that my operation was their first, or that I follow every regulation down to the letter, or that my property is actually quite well maintained. To them, I am an eyesore that lowers their property values. The president of the Meadowbrook Heights HOA is a woman named Karen Northrop, which is almost too perfect to be true. She is 47 years old, drives a white Mercedes SUV, and has that distinctive haircut where it is short in the back and longer in the front. She wears yoga pants like they are business casual, and speaks exclusively in that tone that suggests everyone around her is either incompetent or deliberately trying to ruin her day. I had only interacted with Karen a handful of times over the years, mostly at county planning meetings where she would complain about dust from my pit, or the occasional truck traffic on the county road. Each time, I would patiently explain that my dust suppression systems exceed county requirements, and that my trucks use public roads they have every legal right to use. Each time, she would purse her lips and make a note on her ever-present clipboard, as if documenting evidence for some future crusade. But back to that January morning when I found the tire tracks. Colorado had been hit with a massive winter storm the night before. The Weather Service had been warning about it for days, one of those Arctic fronts that sweeps down from Canada and turns everything into a skating rink. By midnight, we had 6 inches of ice and sleet coating everything, with temperatures dropping to near zero. The kind of weather where the smart thing to do is stay inside with a fire going and wait it out. I woke up around 3:30 because my dog, a German Shepherd named Rex, was barking like crazy. Rex is not a barker unless something is genuinely wrong, so I pulled on my boots and coat and went outside to check the property. The storm had passed, leaving everything encased in ice that glittered under the security lights, beautiful and treacherous in equal measure. That is when I noticed the lock on my main gate was missing. Not broken, not cut, just gone. The chain that should have been securing the gate was lying in the snow, and clear tire tracks led from the county road through my gate and down the access road toward my gravel pit. Multiple sets of tracks, heavy vehicles. I went back inside, grabbed my keys and my phone, and got into my truck. Rex jumped in beside me, still agitated. The access road to my pit was a mess of ice, but my truck has good tires and four-wheel drive. I made it down slowly, following the tracks. What I found at the bottom made my blood boil despite the freezing temperature. 2 dump trucks, both bearing the logo of Mountain Valley Services, a local contractor. Both trucks were parked inside my gravel pit, and I could see where someone had used a front-end loader to scoop sand into them. My front-end loader, specifically. The loader was still sitting there, engine cold, with the keys in the ignition. I sat there for a moment, trying to process what I was seeing. Someone had not only trespassed on my property, but had actively used my equipment to steal my materials. The sand they had taken was not just regular sand either. It was a special blend I keep for traction purposes, mixed with small gravel for better grip. Each load in those trucks represented about $500 of material, plus the fuel they used in my loader, plus the audacity of breaking into my property in the first place. I pulled out my phone and took extensive photos. The trucks, the loader, the tracks, everything. Then I called the sheriff's office. The dispatcher told me it would be at least 2 hours before anyone could get to me. The storm had caused accidents all over the county, and every available deputy was dealing with emergencies. I said I understood and would wait. Then I made a decision. I got back in my truck and drove up to my workshop, where I keep my backup chains and locks. I grabbed the heaviest duty chains I had and the biggest padlocks. Then I drove back down to the pit. I chained and locked both dump trucks to the steel posts I have set in concrete around the pit. These posts are designed to prevent vehicles from getting too close to the edge, and they are solid. Each post is 8 inches in diameter and set 4 feet deep in reinforced concrete. I wrapped the chains through the rear axles of both trucks and around those posts, using multiple locks. If someone wanted to move those trucks, they would need a cutting torch or a tow truck with serious power. After securing the trucks, I drove back up and put a new chain and lock on my main gate. This time, I used a lock that required a special key I had specifically because a previous contractor had lost keys to regular locks. Nobody was getting through that gate without my permission or a pair of bolt cutters. Then I went back inside to wait for the sheriff. Deputy Tom Williams arrived around 6:30, just as the sun was starting to come up. He is a good guy, someone I have known casually for years through various county events. He looked tired and cold as he stepped out of his patrol vehicle. "Morning, Tyler," he said. "Dispatcher said you had a theft." I explained the situation, showed him the photos on my phone, and walked him down to see the trucks. He took his own photos and wrote everything down in his notebook. "You know who the trucks belong to?" he asked. "Mountain Valley Services," I said. "But I do not know who actually drove them onto my property." "I will run the plates and get in touch with the company," he said. "In the meantime, you are within your rights to keep them secured. They were trespassing and stealing. That is clear cut." "What about my missing lock?" I asked. "Someone had to cut it or pick it to get through my gate." "That is breaking and entering on top of the theft," he said. "This is not going to go well for whoever did this. Do you have security cameras?" I shook my head. "I have been meaning to install them, but I never got around to it. This area is usually pretty quiet." "Might want to bump that up your priority list," he said. "I will file a report and start the investigation. Keep those trucks locked up until we sort this out. If anyone gives you trouble, call me directly." He gave me his card and left. I went back inside to make coffee and wait for what I knew was coming. Karen Northrop showed up at my gate at exactly 8 o'clock. I was watching from my kitchen window when her white Mercedes pulled up. She got out, marched up to the gate, and tried the handle. Finding it locked, she stood there for a moment, hands on her hips, before pulling out her phone. My phone rang 30 seconds later. I did not recognize the number, but I answered anyway. "Tyler Armstrong," I said. "This is Karen Northrop, president of the Meadowbrook Heights Homeowners Association," she said in that clipped, imperious tone. "You need to open your gate immediately. You have property that belongs to our community." "What property would that be?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "2 trucks that were being used to distribute sand on our streets during the ice storm," she said. "They need to be returned right now. People cannot get out of the neighborhood, and we have residents who need to get to work and medical appointments." "Those trucks are on my property without my permission," I said. "They are also filled with sand that was stolen from my pit. So no, I will not be opening my gate." "That sand was taken in an emergency situation," she said, her voice rising. "We needed it to make our roads safe." "Then you should have called me and asked permission," I said. "Or better yet, you should have hired a legitimate contractor to supply sand through proper channels. What you did was trespassing and theft." "I will sue you," she said. "I will have you arrested for holding property hostage." "You can try," I said. "I have already filed a police report for breaking and entering, theft of materials, and unauthorized use of my equipment. Deputy Williams has all the documentation. If you have any further concerns, I suggest you contact the sheriff's office or hire a lawyer." I hung up before she could respond. Over the next hour, my phone rang 7 more times from different numbers. I let them all go to voicemail. Each message was some variation of Karen demanding, threatening, or attempting to negotiate for the return of the trucks. One message was from someone who identified himself as the HOA's attorney, threatening legal action for unlawful detention of property. I saved all the messages. At 10 o'clock, my lawyer called. His name is Marcus, and we have worked together for years on various business matters. "Tyler, I just got a very angry call from someone named Karen Northrop," he said. "Want to tell me what is going on?" I explained the entire situation, from finding the missing lock to securing the trucks. Marcus was quiet for a moment after I finished. "So let me make sure I have this straight. They broke into your property, stole your materials, used your equipment without permission, and now they are mad that you secured their trucks." "That is correct," I said. "And you have photos and a police report." "Yes." "Then you are golden," he said. "What they did is multiple felonies: breaking and entering, theft, criminal trespass. Even if they claim emergency circumstances, they had no right to use private property without permission. There is a process for emergency requisitions, and it requires government authority, not a homeowners association. They really stepped in it." "So what do I do?" I asked. "Keep doing exactly what you are doing," he said. "Do not let them bully you into giving up those trucks until this is resolved legally. I will send them a letter making it clear that any further contact should go through me. If they try to take any action against you, we will countersue for harassment on top of everything else." "What about the trucks themselves?" I asked. "I do not want to keep them forever. I just want to be compensated for my losses and make sure this does not happen again." "We will work that out," Marcus said. "First, let me do some digging on this HOA. If they have a pattern of overstepping their authority, that could be useful." After hanging up with Marcus, I went outside to check on the pit. The temperature had risen slightly, but everything was still icy. The 2 dump trucks sat there like monuments to stupidity, chains glistening with frost. I took more photos, documenting everything from multiple angles. Then I checked my loader. Whoever had used it had left the key in the ignition but had at least turned it off properly. I checked the fuel gauge and noted it was down about a quarter tank. More money they owed me. While I was down there, a thought occurred to me. I walked over to one of the trucks and looked in the cab. Sitting on the passenger seat was a clipboard with paperwork. I pulled out my phone and photographed the documents without touching them. The paperwork was a work order from the Meadowbrook Heights HOA, signed by Karen Northrop, authorizing Mountain Valley Services to acquire necessary sand and salt for emergency street treatment. The order specified my address for the pickup location. My address. She had specifically directed them to steal from my property. I immediately called Deputy Williams and told him what I had found. He said he would be back out to collect the evidence and that this significantly strengthened the case. That is premeditation, he said. She cannot claim this was a desperate emergency decision if she wrote up a work order with your address on it. She knew exactly what she was doing. By noon, Deputy Williams had returned, this time with another deputy. They photographed the documents in the truck and then carefully bagged them as evidence. They also took detailed measurements and statements. We will need to talk to the drivers of these trucks, Deputy Williams said. And we will need to have a conversation with Miss Northrop. This is looking more and more like a criminal conspiracy. What happens to the trucks in the meantime? I asked. They stay right where they are until the investigation is complete or until a judge orders otherwise, he said. You have every right to hold them as they are evidence of a crime committed on your property. After the deputies left, I called Marcus back and told him about the work order. That is the nail in the coffin, he said. She documented her own crime. I will draft a letter to the HOA and to Mountain Valley Services outlining exactly what happened and what we expect in terms of compensation. This is going to get expensive for them. How expensive are we talking? I asked. Well, you have the value of the stolen sand, he said. That is around $1,000 based on what you told me. Then, you have the unauthorized use of your equipment, which we can bill at commercial rental rates. Then you have the cost of your damaged lock, the cost of new security measures you will need to implement, and the cost of this entire headache. I would say we start negotiations at $10,000 and see where they land. $10,000, I said. Is not that a bit high? Tyler, they broke into your business and stole from you, Marcus said. If you were a gas station and someone stole $1,000 in merchandise, we would not hesitate to pursue serious charges. Just because you run a gravel pit does not make it any less serious. Plus, we need to make sure they never even think about doing something like this again. Fair point, I said. The afternoon brought more phone calls, which I continued to ignore. I also had a visit from a tow truck, which pulled up to my gate around 2 o'clock. The driver got out and walked up, peering through the chain link. I walked out to meet him. Can I help you? I asked. I got a call to pick up 2 dump trucks from this location, he said. He seemed uncomfortable, like he suspected something was off. Those trucks are being held as evidence in a criminal investigation, I said. If you try to take them, you will be interfering with that investigation. I suggest you call whoever hired you and tell them to contact the sheriff's office. The driver held up his hands. Hey man, I am just doing my job. If there is a legal issue, I want no part of it. Smart move, I said. He got back in his tow truck and left. 5 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Marcus. Karen Northrop just called me, screaming about you threatening a tow truck driver, he said. I told her that any attempt to remove evidence from a crime scene would result in additional charges. She hung up on me. This woman really does not understand the situation she is in, does she? I said. Some people are so used to bullying others that they cannot conceive of consequences, Marcus said. She will learn. That evening, I finally got around to doing something I had been putting off for years. I ordered a complete security camera system online with overnight delivery. 8 cameras with motion detection, night vision, and remote monitoring. I was not going to be caught unprepared again. I also reinforced the chains on the trucks, adding additional locks. If Karen was going to try something stupid, I wanted to make it as difficult as possible. The next day started with a surprise. Deputy Williams called at 7 in the morning. "Tyler, we brought Karen Northrop in for questioning last night," he said. "She admitted to authorizing the entry onto your property. She claims it was an emergency and that she had the authority to requisition private property for public safety." "Does she?" I asked. "Absolutely not," he said. "Only government officials can authorize emergency requisition of private property, and even then, there are strict procedures and immediate compensation requirements. An HOA has no such authority whatsoever." She essentially admitted to conspiracy to commit theft and burglary. "So what happens now?" "The district attorney is reviewing the case," he said. "Given the evidence and her admission, I expect formal charges will be filed within the next few days. Breaking and entering, theft, criminal conspiracy. All felonies." "Wow," I said. "I just wanted to get paid for my sand." "You will," he said. "But she broke serious laws here. The DA takes property crimes seriously, especially when they are premeditated like this." Later that morning, I had a visit from a man in an expensive suit who introduced himself as Richard Halston, attorney for Mountain Valley Services. "Mr. Armstrong," he said, extending his hand. "I want to apologize on behalf of my client for what happened. Our drivers were given bad information and followed orders they should not have followed." "Your drivers broke into my property and stole from me," I said, not shaking his hand. He lowered his hand. "You are absolutely right, and my client is prepared to make this right. We have fired the supervisor who authorized this action, and we are willing to compensate you fully for all losses and damages." "That is between my lawyer and you," I said. "But I appreciate you coming out here." "There is one more thing," he said. "Those trucks are expensive pieces of equipment, and every day they sit here represents significant lost revenue for my client. Is there any way we can negotiate their release?" "Talk to my lawyer," I said. "And talk to the sheriff's office. They are evidence in a criminal case." He nodded. "I understand. I will be in touch with your counsel." True to his word, Richard Halston called Marcus that afternoon. Marcus called me to discuss their offer. "Mountain Valley Services is offering $5,000 in compensation," Marcus said. "They want the trucks released immediately." "What about the HOA?" I asked. "That is a separate issue," Marcus said. "Mountain Valley was hired by the HOA and followed their directions. They are trying to distance themselves from Karen Northrop as fast as possible." "5,000 seems low," I said. "I think we can get more," Marcus said. "Let me counter at 12,000 and we will see where we land. But there is another consideration. If we settle with Mountain Valley, we can release their trucks but still pursue the HOA for the full amount of our damages." "Can we do that?" I asked. "Absolutely," Marcus said. "Mountain Valley contracted to do work for the HOA. If we settle with them, that is between us and them. The HOA still owes you for the original theft and all the associated damages. In fact, Mountain Valley will probably turn around and sue the HOA to recover what they pay you." "That sounds perfect," I said. "Make it happen." Over the next 2 days, negotiations continued. My security cameras arrived, and I spent a full day installing them around my property. 8 cameras covering every entrance, the pit, the workshop, and my house. All connected to a system I could monitor from my phone. I felt better immediately. The cameras came in handy sooner than expected. On the third day after the theft, I got a motion alert on my phone at 2 in the morning. I checked the camera feed and saw a pickup truck with Meadowbrook Heights HOA magnetic signs parked outside my gate. 2 men were examining the lock with flashlights. I immediately called Deputy Williams and then got dressed. By the time I walked out to the gate, the 2 men were still there. One of them had what looked like bolt cutters. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" I called out. They both jumped like they had been shot. One of them dropped the bolt cutters. "We are from the HOA," one of them stammered. "We were just checking on the situation." "With bolt cutters," I said. "At 2 in the morning. We have a right to recover our property," the other one said, finding his courage. "You have a right to remain silent," Deputy Williams said from behind them. Both men spun around to find the deputy standing there with his hand on his service weapon. "You were about to cut that lock, were you not?" Deputy Williams said. "After being told multiple times that these trucks are evidence in a criminal investigation. That is destruction of evidence, breaking and entering, and criminal trespass." "We are just following orders," the first man said. "Whose orders?" Deputy Williams asked. "Karen Northrop," the second man said. "She said we needed to get those trucks back before they get seized permanently." Deputy Williams smiled. It was not a friendly smile. "Turn around and put your hands behind your backs." He arrested both men on the spot. I provided the camera footage, which clearly showed them approaching with bolt cutters. As the deputy loaded them into his patrol car, he looked at me. "This gets worse for Karen every single day," he said. "Now we have evidence of witness tampering and obstruction of justice." The next morning, I got a call from the district attorney's office. An assistant district attorney named Jennifer Martinez wanted to meet with me to discuss the case. I met her at the county courthouse that afternoon. She was in her mid-30s, professional and direct. "Mr. Armstrong, I want you to know that we are taking this case very seriously," she said. "What started as a property crime has escalated significantly. Karen Northrop is now facing multiple felony charges, and the 2 men arrested last night are cooperating fully." "What exactly did they tell you?" I asked. "They confirmed that Karen ordered them to cut the lock and retrieve the trucks," she said. "She told them it was legal and within the HOA's authority. She has essentially been running a criminal enterprise while hiding behind the HOA's legitimacy." "A criminal enterprise seems a bit dramatic," I said. "It really is not," she said. "We have been going through the HOA's records. This is not the first time Karen has abused her authority. We found evidence of her using HOA funds for personal expenses, forging board approval for expenditures, and threatening homeowners with bogus fines to extract money. Your case was just the one that finally brought everything into the light." "Wow," I said. "I just wanted my sand back." She smiled. "Sometimes the smallest things bring down the biggest criminals. We are building a strong case. I wanted to meet with you to prepare you for what comes next. There will be a preliminary hearing in about 2 weeks. You will need to testify about what happened." "I can do that," I said. "I also want to discuss the civil side of things," she said. "I understand you are pursuing compensation through your attorney." "Yes," I said. "We are negotiating with Mountain Valley Services right now." "That is good," she said. "But I want you to know that regardless of any civil settlement, the criminal case will proceed. Karen Northrop does not get to buy her way out of this." "I am glad to hear that," I said. "Marcus called me that evening with good news. Mountain Valley Services has agreed to $10,000, he said. They will also provide written testimony about how Karen directed them to take materials from your property. They are fully cooperating with the criminal investigation." "That is great," I said. "When can we release their trucks?" I will draw up the settlement agreement tonight, Marcus said. Once it is signed and the money is transferred, we can release the trucks. Should be done by tomorrow afternoon. But there is more. I spoke with the HOA's attorney today. Not the one Karen hired personally, but the official attorney for the HOA board. And, I asked, the board has voted to remove Karen as president pending the criminal investigation, Marcus said. They are also exploring the possibility of suing her personally for the damage she has done to the association. The new acting president, a woman named Linda Chambers, wants to settle with you directly and apologize for everything that happened. Really? I said. She is coming from a position of weakness, and she knows it, Marcus said. The HOA is liable for Karen's actions since she was acting in her official capacity when she ordered the theft. Linda is trying to minimize the damage. I think we can get a substantial settlement here. How substantial? I asked. 15 to 20,000, plus a formal written apology and an agreement that the HOA will never interfere with your business operations again, Marcus said. I whistled. That seems like a lot. You could probably get more if you wanted to drag this through court, Marcus said. But sometimes quick and certain is better than large and uncertain. Your choice. Let me think about it, I said. That night, I sat in my house with Rex at my feet and really considered what I wanted out of this situation. The truth was, I did not care about getting rich from this. I just wanted to be left alone to run my business in peace. If the HOA was willing to formally agree to never interfere with me again, that was worth more than any amount of money. I called Marcus back the next morning. Take their offer, I said, but I want the written agreement to be ironclad. If anyone from the HOA ever trespasses on my property, harasses me about my business operations, or attempts to interfere with my operations in any way, the agreement is void and they owe me an additional $50,000 in penalties. I can work with that, Marcus said. I will draft the agreement today. The settlement with Mountain Valley Services was finalized that afternoon. $10,000 was transferred to my account, and I provided them with the keys and codes to release their trucks. They sent a supervisor with the drivers, and all three men apologized profusely as they unchained the trucks and drove them away. The supervisor, a man named Dave, stayed behind for a moment after the trucks left. "Look, Mr. Armstrong," he said, "I know we screwed up. Our company has been doing business in this county for 20 years, and we have never had something like this happen. That supervisor we fired, the one who authorized this, he and Karen were apparently dating. He did this as a favor to her without getting proper authorization from our office." "That explains a lot," I said. "I want you to know that Mountain Valley Services respects property rights and legal procedures," Dave said. "If you ever need any work done, any hauling or grading or anything, I hope you will give us a chance to make this right." "I appreciate that," I said. "Let's see how things go." He shook my hand and left. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The trucks were gone, I had been compensated, and things were moving forward. The settlement with the HOA took a bit longer to finalize. Linda Chambers came to meet with me and Marcus at my property. She was in her early 50s, dressed professionally, and looked genuinely mortified about the entire situation. "Mr. Armstrong, I want to apologize on behalf of every reasonable person in Meadowbrook Heights," she said. "What Karen did was unconscionable. She acted without board approval, misrepresented the HOA's authority, and has caused tremendous damage to our community's reputation." "I appreciate that," I said. "The board has voted unanimously to accept the settlement terms your attorney proposed," she said. $15,000, plus a binding agreement that the HOA will never interfere with your business operations. We are also implementing new oversight procedures to ensure that no one person can ever abuse the HOA's authority like this again. That sounds good, I said. There is one more thing, Linda said. I know this might be awkward, but several homeowners in our community have expressed interest in purchasing sand and gravel from you for their personal projects. Would you be open to that? Obviously, we would follow proper procedures, get quotes, and pay you fairly. I thought about it. The irony was not lost on me. Sure, I said. I am always happy to do legitimate business. Marcus and Linda signed the settlement agreement that afternoon. $15,000 was transferred to my account the next day. Combined with the Mountain Valley settlement, I had received $25,000 for sand that had cost me maybe $1,000 to process. Not bad. But the real satisfaction came 3 weeks later when the criminal case against Karen Northrop went to court. The preliminary hearing was held on a Thursday morning in Boulder County District Court. I arrived with Marcus, even though I was not sure if I would need to testify that day. The courtroom was surprisingly full. Several Meadowbrook Heights residents had shown up, along with representatives from Mountain Valley Services and what looked like local media. Karen Northrop sat at the defense table with her attorney, a nervous-looking young man who appeared to have drawn the short straw. Karen herself looked different from the imperious HOA president I remembered. She was paler, thinner, and had dark circles under her eyes. The reality of her situation had apparently set in. The prosecutor, Jennifer Martinez, presented the case methodically. She entered the work order Karen had written as evidence, showed the police reports, and played the security camera footage of the two men attempting to cut my lock. She also presented testimony from the two men, who had both accepted plea deals in exchange for their cooperation. The defense attorney tried to argue that Karen had acted in good faith during an emergency, believing she had the authority to requisition materials for public safety. Jennifer destroyed that argument by pointing out the premeditation shown in the work order and by citing the actual laws governing emergency requisitions. The judge, an older woman named Catherine Reyes, listened carefully to both sides. When the defense finished their arguments, she removed her glasses and looked directly at Karen. "Miss Northrop," she said, "do you understand the charges against you?" "Yes, Your Honor," Karen said quietly. "You are charged with conspiracy to commit burglary, grand theft, criminal trespass, and obstruction of justice," Judge Reyes said. "These are serious felonies that carry significant prison time. Do you also understand that?" "Yes, Your Honor," Karen said. "The evidence presented here today shows a pattern of deliberate criminal conduct," Judge Reyes said. "This was not a panicked emergency decision. This was planned, documented, and executed with full knowledge that you were violating Mr. Armstrong's property rights. Then, when confronted with the consequences of your actions, you attempted to obstruct the investigation." Karen started to cry. Her attorney put a hand on her shoulder. "I am binding you over for trial on all charges," Judge Reyes said. "Bail is set at $50,000. Trial is scheduled for March 15th. Do not leave the state and do not contact Mr. Armstrong or anyone else involved in this case." The bailiff led Karen away. She never looked at me once during the entire proceeding. Outside the courthouse, several reporters approached me for a comment. I kept it brief. "I am satisfied that justice is being served," I said. "I hope this sends a message that property rights matter and that no one is above the law, regardless of what position they hold in their community." That quote ended up in the Boulder Daily Camera the next day, along with a full story about the case. The article described Karen's abuse of authority, the theft from my property, and the subsequent investigation. Several Meadowbrook Heights residents were quoted expressing shock and dismay about what their HOA president had done. One quote stood out to me. A resident named Michael Torres said, "We elected Karen because she promised to protect our property values and maintain high standards. Instead, she turned our HOA into a criminal operation. This is not what any of us signed up for." The attention from the case actually ended up being good for my business. I received calls from several construction companies I had never worked with before, all wanting to establish contracts for sand and gravel. Apparently, being the victim of an HOA's overreach made me sympathetic in the eyes of many contractors who had their own HOA horror stories. I also had several Meadowbrook Heights residents reach out directly to purchase materials. Linda Chambers was true to her word about letting people do business with me. I ended up supplying sand for playground projects, gravel for driveways, and landscaping stone for various yards. The relationship between my business and the neighborhood improved significantly. Karen's trial took place in mid-March. I had to testify, walking the jury through what I discovered that morning and what I found in the trucks. The prosecutor also called Deputy Williams, the two men who had attempted to cut my lock, and the supervisor from Mountain Valley Services who had been fired. The defense tried to paint Karen as a dedicated community servant who made a mistake in judgment during a crisis. But the prosecution had too much evidence of premeditation and subsequent cover-up attempts. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Judge Ray's scheduled sentencing for 2 weeks later. In the meantime, the media coverage continued. The case had become something of a sensation, a perfect example of HOA overreach. Several news outlets did deeper investigations into HOA abuses of power, using Karen's case as the primary example. I tried to stay out of the media circus as much as possible, but I did agree to one interview with a local journalist who was doing a piece on property rights. I explained that I had no ill will toward Meadowbrook Heights residents, but that I had worked too hard building my business to let anyone destroy it through illegal actions. "You think HOAs serve a useful purpose?" the journalist asked. "I think they can when they are managed responsibly," I said. "A good HOA maintains common areas, enforces reasonable rules that everyone agrees to, and builds community. But when you give someone power without proper oversight, bad things can happen. That is true whether it is an HOA, a corporation, or a government. Karen Northrop had too much power and not enough accountability." The sentencing hearing was emotional. Karen's family members testified about how she had been under stress, how she had always tried to do her best for the community, and how she had made a terrible mistake. Several Meadowbrook Heights residents also spoke, some in her defense and some describing how her actions had hurt them. I also had an opportunity to make a victim impact statement. I kept it factual and brief. "Your Honor," I said, "Karen Northrop violated my property rights, stole from my business, and attempted to intimidate me when I stood up for myself. But beyond the financial impact, she showed a fundamental disrespect for the law and for the rights of others. That disrespect continued throughout this process, as evidenced by her attempts to obstruct the investigation. I hope the sentence reflects the seriousness of these crimes and deters others from thinking they can abuse positions of authority." The prosecutor recommended a sentence of 4 years in prison, noting Karen's lack of remorse and her attempts to cover up the crime. The defense asked for probation and community service, emphasizing Karen's previously clean record. Judge Reyes took a few moments to review her notes before speaking. "Miss Northrop," she said, "you were elected to a position of trust within your community. People relied on you to act in their best interests and to follow the law. Instead, you abused that trust spectacularly. You planned and executed a burglary, attempted to cover it up, and showed no genuine remorse until you were facing serious consequences. She paused. However, I also recognize that you have no prior criminal record, and that you did ultimately cooperate with portions of the investigation. Taking everything into account, I am sentencing you to 2 years in the county correctional facility, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. You will also pay restitution to Mr. Armstrong in the amount of $30,000 for his legal fees, lost business opportunities, and emotional distress. Karen broke down sobbing. Her attorney looked relieved that she had avoided the maximum sentence. Additionally, Judge Reyes continued, you are prohibited from serving in any position of authority within a homeowners association for the remainder of your probation period. If you violate any terms of your probation, you will serve the remainder of your sentence in state prison. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor, Karen managed to say through her tears. The bailiff led her away. I felt a mix of emotions. Relief that it was over, satisfaction that justice had been served, but also a strange sadness. Karen had destroyed her own life through arrogance and a refusal to respect boundaries. It was entirely her own fault, but it was still a waste. Outside the courthouse, Marcus shook my hand. That restitution money will probably take years to collect, he said. But combined with the settlements, you are in a good position. I honestly do not even care about the money anymore, I said. I just want to get back to normal life. You can, Marcus said. This is over, you won, and he was right. The next few weeks were blissfully quiet. I worked in my pit, filled orders for various contractors, and enjoyed not having any drama. My security cameras captured nothing more interesting than the occasional deer. Linda Chambers proved to be an excellent HOA president. She implemented new bylaws requiring board approval for any significant expenditures, and established a formal process for residents to appeal HOA decisions. She also organized a neighborhood meeting where she invited me to speak about my business and what we did. I explained the gravel pit operation, the safety measures we used, and the environmental regulations we followed. Several residents asked good questions, and I could see attitudes shifting. Once people understood what I actually did, the fear and resentment disappeared. One man, who introduced himself as Robert, approached me after the meeting. I have to admit, I was one of the people who complained about your pit when we first moved in, he said. I thought it was going to be noisy and ugly and hurt our property values. But listening to you talk tonight, I realize I never bothered to learn anything about your operation. I just assumed it was bad because Karen told us it was. I appreciate you saying that, I said. Karen convinced a lot of us that you were the enemy, he said. She used fear to control people. I am glad she is gone, and I am glad you are still here. That conversation represented how I felt about the whole situation. Karen had created an us versus them mentality, positioning me as a threat to the neighborhood. But once people actually engaged with me as a human being running a legitimate business, the hostility evaporated. By summer, things had settled into a new normal. My business was thriving. I had great relationships with my neighbors in Meadowbrook Heights, and I had finally installed the security system I should have had years ago. I also ended up hiring one of the young men from the neighborhood, a college student named Jake, who needed summer work. He was smart, hardworking, and grateful for the opportunity. His father told me that Jake had learned more about running a business in 3 months with me than in 4 years of business classes. The lawsuit that the HOA filed against Karen for misusing their authority and damaging their reputation was settled out of court. Karen agreed to pay back all the money the HOA had lost due to her actions, including the settlement they paid me. I heard through Linda that Karen had to sell her house to cover the costs. I saw Karen one time after the trial. It was about 6 months into her sentence, and I was at the grocery store in Boulder. She was there with what looked like a work release supervisor, wearing plain clothes but clearly under supervision. She saw me from across the store and our eyes met for a moment. I nodded slightly, acknowledging her existence. She looked away quickly, her face flushing red. I went about my shopping and did not see her again. A year after everything started, I was sitting on my porch on a cold January evening, almost the anniversary of that morning when I found the tire tracks. Rex was at my feet, and I had a beer in my hand. My phone buzzed with a notification from my security cameras, just a deer passing through. I thought about how much had changed in 1 year. My business had grown significantly. I had better relationships with my neighbors. I had learned important lessons about protecting my property and my rights. And I had seen firsthand how someone's arrogance and sense of entitlement could lead to their own destruction. The story had even gone semi-viral on social media, with various HOA horror story forums sharing it as a cautionary tale. I had people from across the country email me to say how inspired they were that I had stood up to an abusive HOA. That was never my intention, but I was glad if my experience helped others. Marcus called that evening to tell me that the final restitution payment from Karen had been processed. Between the settlements from Mountain Valley Services and the HOA, plus the restitution from Karen, I had received over $70,000 total. Not bad for a pile of sand, Marcus said. Not bad at all, I agreed. Send me your final bill. Already did, he said. But I have to say, this was the most satisfying case I have worked on in years. Justice was actually served. After hanging up, I sat there thinking about what justice really meant. Karen was in prison, paying a heavy price for her crimes. The 2 men who tried to cut my lock had received probation and community service. Mountain Valley Services had cleaned house and reformed their procedures. The Meadowbrook Heights HOA had new leadership and new rules to prevent future abuses. And me. I was right where I started, running my gravel pit and living my life. Except now I had security cameras, a much healthier bank account, and the satisfaction of knowing I had stood up for what was right. The next morning, I woke up to find 6 inches of fresh snow on the ground. I made coffee, checked the cameras, and got ready for another day of work. As I was heading out to fire up the loader, my phone rang. It was Linda Chambers. "Tyler, I hope I am not bothering you," she said. "Not at all," I said. "What can I do for you?" "We have a situation," she said, and my heart sank. "But not a bad one. We have a legitimate need for sand for our streets. The county has been delayed in getting to our neighborhood, and we have some ice buildup. I wanted to ask if you would be willing to supply sand at your standard commercial rate. I have 3 quotes from other suppliers, but I wanted to give you the opportunity first." I smiled. "Send me the details of what you need, and I will get you a quote within the hour." "Thank you," she said. I want to do this right. 2 hours later, I had a signed contract to supply sand to Meadowbrook Heights. I delivered it myself that afternoon, using my own truck, and several residents waved as I spread sand on their streets. One woman even brought me a thermos of hot coffee. As I worked, I thought about the difference a year made. Last January, someone from the HOA had broken into my property and stolen from me. This January, the same HOA was paying me fairly for the same service. That was justice in its purest form. When I finished, I drove back to my property and parked the truck. Rex greeted me enthusiastically, and I scratched behind his ears. "We did good, buddy," I told him. "We stood our ground and things worked out." He wagged his tail, uninterested in the philosophical implications, but happy to have my attention. I spent the rest of the afternoon working in my workshop, building some new equipment I needed. As the sun set, I checked the security cameras one more time, made sure everything was locked up properly, and went inside to make dinner. Life was good. My business was thriving. My community relationships were strong, and I had learned valuable lessons about standing up for my rights while also being willing to work with people who approached me with respect and honesty. The story of Karen Northrop and the Great Sand Theft, as it became known locally, faded into legend over the following months. Occasionally, someone would recognize my name and ask if I was that guy from the HOA case, and I would confirm it with a nod. But mostly, life returned to normal. The final chapter came about 18 months after the original incident. Karen was released from prison, having served her sentence with good behavior. She moved out of state, somewhere back east where she had family. I heard through Linda that she had taken a low-level administrative job and was trying to rebuild her life quietly. I never heard from her directly, and that was fine with me. I did not need an apology or closure beyond what the legal system had provided. She had faced consequences for her actions, paid her restitution, and presumably learned some hard lessons about respecting other people's property and rights. The Meadowbrook Heights HOA, under Linda's leadership, became something of a model for responsible HOA governance. They invited speakers to their meetings to discuss legal boundaries. They published transparent financial reports, and they established an ombudsman position to handle resident complaints. Linda even asked me to speak at a regional HOA conference about the importance of respecting property rights and following legal procedures. I declined. I had said everything I needed to say, and I had no interest in becoming some kind of anti-HOA crusader. I just wanted to run my business in peace. Mountain Valley Services, and I ended up developing a good working relationship. They contracted with me regularly to supply materials for their projects, and they always paid promptly and treated my property with respect. Dave, the supervisor who had apologized so profusely, even sent me a Christmas card that first year with a note thanking me for giving them a second chance. The security camera system I installed proved worth every penny. It never caught anything as dramatic as someone trying to steal from me again, but it gave me peace of mind and actually helped identify a teenager who was spray painting graffiti on county road signs near my property. I provided the footage to the sheriff's office, and the kid's parents made him clean up all the signs and apologize. Small-town justice at its finest. My business grew steadily over the next few years. I hired 2 full-time employees and bought new equipment. I expanded my materials offerings and started doing more custom orders for landscaping companies. The gravel pit that Karen Northrop had viewed as an eyesore became a respected local business that employed people and contributed to the community. On the 5-year anniversary of the incident, the Boulder Daily Camera did a follow-up article about HOA reform in Colorado, using my case as a starting point. They interviewed Linda Chambers, Marcus, Deputy Williams, and even got a statement from the district attorney's office about how the case had influenced their approach to HOA-related crimes. The reporter asked if she could interview me as well. I agreed, figuring enough time had passed that I could reflect on it with some perspective. Looking back, "Do you regret how you handled the situation?" she asked. "Not at all," I said. "I followed the law, protected my property, and insisted on accountability." Those are basic principles that should not be controversial. What would you say to someone facing a similar situation with their HOA? Document everything, I said. Know your rights. Get a good lawyer. And do not let anyone bully you into accepting illegal behavior just because they claim to represent a community or an organization. The law applies to everyone equally. Do you think HOAs are inherently problematic? No, I said. I think HOAs can serve valuable purposes when run by honest, competent people who understand the limits of their authority. The problem is not HOAs themselves, but the people who use them as personal fiefdoms. Good governance requires transparency, accountability, and respect for the rights of all stakeholders. The article ran the following Sunday with the headline, 5 years later, How One Man's Stand Against HOA Overreach Changed Colorado. It was a bit grandiose, but the article was well written and fair. It even included a comment from Karen's attorney confirming that she had completed her probation successfully and was living quietly in Pennsylvania. I hoped she had learned from the experience and was living a better life. Despite everything, I held no animosity toward her. She had made terrible choices, faced appropriate consequences, and hopefully grown as a person. That was all anyone could ask for. As for me, I continued running my gravel pit, enjoying the work and the independence it gave me. I never did move into one of those subdivisions with their manicured lawns and their rules about mailbox colors. I liked my 40 acres, my business, and my freedom. Rex eventually got old and crossed the Rainbow Bridge, and I got a new dog, a rescue mutt named Ranger who loved riding in the truck and supervising my work. Life went on as it does. Sometimes, on quiet winter evenings when snow blankets my property, I think about that morning when I found the tire tracks leading through my gate. It seemed like a disaster at the time, a violation that made me angry and defensive. But it ended up teaching me valuable lessons about standing up for what was right, about the importance of documentation and legal protection, and about how facing adversity can sometimes lead to unexpected positive outcomes. My business was stronger because of what happened. My relationships with my neighbors were better. I had a security system that protected my property, and I had the satisfaction of knowing that when someone powerful tried to steamroll over me, I stood my ground and won. That morning, standing at my gate in the freezing cold, looking at those tire tracks, I could never have imagined how everything would unfold. I just knew someone had violated my property, and I was not going to let that stand. Sometimes, life really is that simple. You identify a wrong, you take appropriate action, and you let the chips fall where they may. Looking back now, from the comfort of my warm house with Ranger sleeping at my feet and my business thriving outside, I know I made the right choice. Every single step of the way, I did what needed to be done. I protected my property, insisted on accountability, worked with law enforcement and the legal system, and ultimately prevailed. The sand Karen Northrop stole that January night was worth maybe $1,000. But the principle of property rights and the rule of law, that was priceless. And that was worth fighting for, no matter how long it took or how difficult it became. Justice was served. Lessons were learned. Life went on. And my gravel pit kept producing sand and gravel for honest customers who paid fair prices and respected the law. That is all I ever wanted, and that is exactly what I got. The story of the HOA that used my gravel pit for sand during an ice storm ended exactly as it should have, with the guilty held accountable, the innocent compensated, and the community improved. It was not the dramatic ending you might see in a movie, but it was real, and it was right, and it was enough.